Well, uh,
Let's just.
Yeah, it's too bad he's not, here, but you print it out.
Yeah.
All right. I think I will open up the meeting of the Delta County Planning Commission, regular meeting, August 13th, 2025. Tonight's meeting is just a work session. There are a number of things on our agenda to talk about, get more information about. It's really an information gathering, intent for our planning commission members to understand better some of the things that we've been coming across in the code, as well as talk about potential changes or adjustments that we think need to be made to land use regulations in the future. We have several things on our agenda to talk about. So I guess first we should start with the roll call. Cindy, do you want to start?
sure. Cindy Watson, District 1 Delta.
Sean Gardner, Director of Planning.
Angela Reed, planning technician. Brittany Haney, planner 1.
Everett Neal, code compliance.
Tony Potts, District 3.
Todd Queen, District 1.
Lance Home, District 2.
Wayne Bronis, District 2.
And I'm Kate Darlington, District 3. Sean had a list of different topics to cover. Is there any interest in adding or correcting any of the agenda as Sean sent it out?
Those two things.
Nope, okay. No meeting minutes to address tonight. So we'll open up this work session format. I want to kind of place an end time on this so that we don't get too in the weeds about anything and that we can all go home. I didn't add up all your time frames, Sean. Did you have a kind of a goal in mind for how long this would take us?
No.
Okay.
6 o'clock.
I
Um,
We can do it.
Yeah.
don't think so.
Second.
Yeah. Anyway, I was kind of 1, 2. Hopefully, my goal would be we'd be definitely done by 7. And that we can, if things are taking longer, I think that's an indication to us that they
Need more.
need a little bit more time, either more information, more time for us to consider, or, you know, a more prepared attack. So take it away, Sean.
Oh, well, let's just begin with the traffic studies, so I put together 10 questions that I've commonly heard from people and from the PC and that have come up, from planning commission hearings. Provided those here to Skip Hudson, who's here with us tonight. He's a professional traffic engineer, used to be with CDOT. He'll introduce himself. Tim McCracken was also planning to be here, but he couldn't make it. He's got a sick child, but I am sending him a link to this and he may join online and chime in, but he also provided some responses to some of the prepared questions. But these are just like, priming the pump questions. If you guys have other questions, I told Skip we want to make this as conversational so you can ask any kinds of questions you have about traffic studies. And with that, I'll kind of hand it over to Skip to introduce himself.
Thanks. Well, thanks for inviting me to this. It's something I've offered to staff a while ago, working on various projects around the county. And I know from my work at CDOT, we would go around to local governments and do presentations. I've got one of those here today that we will probably refer to. The complexities of the State Highway Access Code and traffic studies keep me in business. That's all I do. So it's confusing stuff and it doesn't always pass the smell test when you get into the State Highway Access Code. So just to stay on the time frame, I think we can grab some of the low hanging fruit first, and then we'll save some of the CDOT stuff, you know, after we get past that. Because we could talk for 2 hours about the CDOT stuff alone, because of its complications. But yeah, I've been doing this for 40 years, licensed as a professional engineer in a couple states now. And worked for CDOT Region 3 in the permitting section for 3 years. And was actually involved with the team that came up with the 3 levels of traffic studies, trying to make them more representative of the size of the project and the impact of the project, rather than having to do a full-blown traffic study for projects that are 2 single-family residences and things like that. Can everybody hear me okay?
Mhm.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yep.
You want me to jump into some of these questions, or does anybody have anything to start?
Jump in with questions.
All right, so I see some of you have this document that Tim prepared. You have this?
Mhm.
So this is great that he did this. I just saw this before I hit the road, but you know, this answers your questions and you have it in writing, so you can refer back to it in the future if you want to. But the first question is, what are the differences between the different levels of traffic studies? And that's the first thing on Tim's handout there. Now, the one thing to know is that every agency has different levels and they don't always mean the same thing. So the county level 1, 2, 3 doesn't necessarily match CDOT's levels 1, 2, and 3. But this is the county levels that he's talking about here. So the level 1 is the simplest one. It's an initial thing that's done to identify how big the project is and if there's going to be impacts on the public road. You know, basically site information, average daily traffic, counts on adjacent roads, and trip generation calculations. So there's some follow-up questions related to trip generation, so let's talk about that. People wonder where I come up with estimates of how much traffic is going to come from a certain project. So I rely on a national database that's administered by the Institute of Transportation Engineers, ITE. It's actually an app on my computer. And that database has actual counts from similar land uses in maybe 100 or 200 categories. Single-family subdivision, attached apartments, things that are relatively standard and uniform. And it says, hey, there was a 100 unit subdivision. We counted the traffic. We came up with the trip rates. And then they did that a bunch of times in studies all over the country. So the trip generation estimates are based on actual data for similar uses. Where it gets challenging is when you have non-consistent projects like a gravel pit. You guys know one pit could, you know, be hauling a bunch of tonnage per day and other ones aren't. So there's no standard rate for that. And then I've got to rely on interviews with the operator and understand how they plan to run their business. You know, how many tons their state permit allows over the year, and then we break it down from a yearly thing, which in traffic terms is ADT, annual daily traffic. You know, or things like, you know, recently we had the Ready Mix plant. They're all different, so I had to you know, work with them and come up with the estimates. So that's where trip generation comes from. I'm not making it up. It's either getting information from ITE and the trip rates, or it's working with the operators. So back to the levels, level 2 is required if there's more than 20% of road capacity, if there's going to be an impact to more than 20% of road capacity. And this is another question that came up, is what is road capacity and what does that mean? So let's talk about that. At the highest level, a pure 1 lane of road without any side roads or stop signs or anything. There's a federal document called the Highway Capacity Manual, and it says that every lane has about 1,900 vehicles per hour per lane. So you could get 1,900 vehicles on 1 lane in 1 hour. Now that would be bumper to bumper, it almost look like a train, and they'd be going pretty fast. That's somewhat theoretical. There's different information about what the capacity of roadways are. In my experience, I started working in Florida with the Florida DOT, and they're recognized as kind of a cutting edge of traffic operations stuff. CDOT doesn't have any information about what's the capacity of various roads. Most communities don't have information about what the capacity is. So I rely on this Florida information. And it's the reason I like it is it breaks it down by community type. You know, are you downtown? Are you in a suburban area? Are you in a rural area? You know, how many lanes and what's some characteristics of the roads? But they come out with tables for the different, you know, land use areas that I talked about, the context. And they say that, you know, a rural road, and I'm trying to remember what it was. I think it was like 1,300 in some recent studies I did on some roads. Each lane, it has about 1,300 vehicles per hour of capacity. So there's not many county roads with 1,300, that's one way. So there's not many county roads with, you know, 2,600 vehicles per hour of two-way traffic. So the way it's written, 20% of a road's capacity is a pretty high bar. Because of the capacity, call it 1,000, you know, if you've got more than 200, you know, then you'd be affecting that. Another way that this is stated is a 20% increase from existing traffic volumes. So capacity is a theoretical capacity that a lane can handle. On the other hand, you could count traffic on the road, which the county does. They do traffic counts every once in a while. And, you know, most of the rural roads have such low volumes that it doesn't take much to do a 20% increase. That's part of the problem that we get into with CDOT, so I'll come back to that later. So the way the code's written now is it's 20% of a road capacity. So you could have a project, you know, up to, you know, 200-300 trips an hour, and it wouldn't kick the trigger for being more than 20% of capacity.
Doesn't the roads classification come to play in that calculation?
It does, and the data that I use from the Florida DOT does break it down by roadway classification. So it's context to the community and the road class.
Excuse me.
So what you're saying is Colorado or Delta County doesn't have our own standards for what that capacity means. You as an independent engineer are deciding what that means.
Yeah, and I've got to use national or other state information wherever it's available. So capacity is kind of squirrely. It's easy on a road segment. It gets more challenging at intersections, especially a two-way stop controlled intersection. I set up this guy I worked with at CDOT. He was going to some training on this highway capacity manual, and I asked him to ask the question at class, what's the capacity of a two-way stop controlled intersection? It depends, because if you're on the main line, capacity is unlimited. You never have to stop, right? You know, you just keep right on rolling, but on the side road, you know, you're stopped because there's a stop sign. So how do you combine those and come up with a capacity of that intersection? You really can't do it. You can do it for a signalized intersection because it's all quantified in how the signal operates, but you can't do it for an unsignalized. But no, this is something, and we do traffic studies, there's a upfront part called a traffic study methodology for bigger projects, where I outline all the assumptions and what sources I'm going to use for data and the basis of my assumptions. And then the agencies review that, and we get on the same page with some of these assumptions and what the data sources are. Then we do the traffic study based on that.
All right.
Oh, Can I ask a question?
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay, so I know there's a lot of detail that go into these traffic studies. Okay, I totally get that. The issue that we have, I think, as a group, and just recently we had, is that an applicant, first of all, did a project, which then created traffic to happen at this venue, okay? Neighbors, of course, wanted to see a traffic study done just to see how much impact would happen on that road. A few years later, we're faced with the same applicant. Now we're talking about a cluster subdivision where there's probably going to be 2 cars per home, approximately another 16 vehicles plus the venue. And one of the biggest brought up things in our public comment by several of the people that asked to speak in public comment, you're working off of an old traffic study. The one you looked at was years ago. Why was the applicant or why was a new traffic study not updated for that area. So I guess my question is, when an applicant then comes to the planning staff and they're looking at wanting to change something, and that's gonna create potentially more traffic, is a traffic study then something that should get done? Mainly for those other individuals that are living in homes that are gonna be affected by this?
It wasn't an old traffic study, it was traffic counts were old, I believe.
Okay,
The traffic counts for that.
traffic counts, okay,
Yeah, I know the project you're talking about, and I did two studies. I did one for
Okay.
the event center up front, and then I did one for the 8 unit, I think it's an 8 unit
Right.
subdivision. But just to go back to one thing you said, you came up with a trip estimate, but the IT manual says that a single family home generates one trip in the peak hour. So in the morning, it's, someone going to work, in the afternoon, it's someone coming back.
right,
That's just a rule of thumb. It's not exactly that, but the companion rule of thumb is each single family house would generate 10 trips a day. 5 in, trips are always one way, so 5 in and 5 out.
Okay.
So, an 8 unit subdivision is gonna have 8 trips in the morning and 8 trips in the afternoon. If it's got 8. So the data that I used in both of those was the same data, and it was dated data. It was, the county isn't going around, it would cost an inordinate amount of money to get new traffic counts on every county road and all the segments in the county roads. So the county does the best they can to get that. In fact,
Yeah, I
Yeah,
find it included information.
yeah, on that first page of Tim's document, he talks about traffic counts, collecting the current traffic volumes, average daily traffic,
Mhm.
which is a 24-hour count. When I do traffic studies, I analyze peak periods. So, daily traffic is one measure, but it's not used in any operational analysis. But if I'm talking about capacity and, there's a county road that has 200 vehicles a day on it, a good rule of thumb, and the relationship between the peak hour and the daily traffic is a factor of 10. So if there's 200 per day, I'm gonna say, okay, there's 20 per hour. And that's two-way volume, so that means 10 in one direction, 10 in the other. So that's how I convert from the daily information that I get into the peak hours, so I can do my calculations. So, a way to resolve that is the traffic study could include a new traffic count of the peak hour volumes on the road. And then we don't have to rely on old data.